All right, here we go, guys. Topic 8, post-war America. We're going to start out here in sections 8.1 through 8.4. It's the United States versus the Soviet Union here. There's going to be a bunch of differences as to why these two superpowers don't really like each other. And the primary ones are going to be economic and political differences, although there's going to be some other things as well. And this is really going to lead and be the basis of the Cold War. Several things here. Capitalism versus communism is a big one. A couple other things that are different here. Freedom of religion in the U.S. In the Soviet Union, you're either atheist with no religion, or you have very limited religious freedom. Basically, the government's going to tell you what to worship. No private ownership. It's all owned by the government, who then tells you what you can and cannot own under the communist Soviet Union. In the U.S., you can own whatever you want. It's your call. Democracy, of course, here in the U.S. Dictatorship and only really one political party. In this case, initially, it's going to be Joseph Stalin and the Communist Party. Free speech in the U.S. compared to no real free speech in the Soviet Union unless you're saying nice things about Stalin. So these are just some examples of some basic differences. They're going to kind of differentiate between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And the biggest ones are going to be capitalism versus communism. And with capitalism, you can throw in democracy there a little bit too against communism. Cold War is going to start in part because Yalta and Potsdam fail. There's supposed to be free and open elections in Europe after the war, after World War II. Stalin never really intended this. He kind of agreed to it, but he never really meant for it to happen because he was concerned that those countries might vote to not be communist, which would weaken his power if that was the case. So the Cold War is going to start between, quote unquote, the West, which is led by the United States, Western countries more associated with democracy and capitalism, and the East more associated with Soviet Union and communism. It's going to last for nearly 45 years until about 1991. Some of those economic and political differences we've talked about in class and on the previous slide there are major reasons why. Again, it's going to circle back to communism versus democracy and capitalism here. Iron Curtain, said by Winston Churchill. It's kind of a metaphorical thing. There's not actually an Iron Curtain. But he said, Churchill's given speeches, and he says, there's an Iron Curtain descended across Europe, meaning that, in Soviet-controlled areas, you're going to have the quote-unquote East, and on the more democratic or U.S.-influenced areas to the West, there's going to be a major divide of thought, beliefs, political systems, economic systems. And there's going to be an Iron Curtain that divides them. Notice in the cartoons there, suggesting, the marks of Stalin, communism, Soviet Union, suggesting that this is imposed by the Soviet Union here. And you're also going to have this really on the eastern side. You're going to see the satellite states, which are controlled by the Soviet Union. Here they are: East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, Albania as well. Yugoslavia, they were, but they do remove themselves from the Eastern Bloc, as does Albania eventually. All those countries, it's kind of like a puppet. They're going to have their own quote-unquote supposedly independent governments, but ultimately the Soviet Union is kind of pulling the strings. So yes, Poland, Hungary, and all those other satellite countries, they can operate as they wish, so long as they ultimately align with what Stalin wants. And if they don't, he's probably going to step in as the Eastern Bloc and those satellite nations right there. Truman Doctrine, President Harry Truman, he basically says, look, we need to fight communism. What's one easy way to do that? Well, let's fund anybody that is resisting communism. A couple examples of this are Turkey and Greece, $400 million, which is quite a lot of money to resist communism. And we'll kind of see this play out throughout the Cold War a little bit. Furthermore, you've got containment by American diplomat George F. Kennan. Basically, wherever communism is, it can stay there, but we don't want it to spread, kind of highlighted a little bit in that cartoon to the right there with the marker. Let it exist where it is, but do not let it spread. Truman Doctrine and containment are going to be, in a sense, problematic in that they're going to encourage us to get involved in places around the world where communism is threatened to spread, take over various countries, because we have to fight it per policy. So this is going to involve us in several instances around the world, conflict between us and the Soviet Union, although not directly. You've got the Marshall Plan that's going to come in 1948, a couple years after the war. Secretary of State George C. Marshall, former military guy in World War II, his idea is, look, Europe has one of two options here to rebuild. They need money to help get started. They can either get it from us or the communist Soviet Union. So our goal is to give them financial and agricultural aid so they can rebuild Europe, plant crops, all that sort of stuff. on the condition that they are going to go more democratic, be more capitalistic. So basically what it amounts to is if you accept our money, you're kind of aligning yourself with the United States. If you refuse it, you're somewhat aligning yourself with the Soviet Union. The real goal of it here, in a sense, is to make these countries stronger and see that capitalism works, and then they'll kind of buy American goods in particular, and that will therefore prove capitalism is the best, which will then hopefully, we're thinking, get more countries to be capitalist and fewer to be communist. $13 billion in grants and loans to Western Europe, so this is a lot of money. Stalin's going to hate this because we are going to offer it to countries like Poland, for instance, Czechoslovakia, which they're going to refuse it though, because they are part of that Eastern Bloc. But it does threaten his power and communism's power, really, so he does not like the Marshall Plan. The Berlin Airlift, as a result of this here, Stalin is going to blockade all of Western and Eastern Germany. He's going to basically close off his section of Germany, or excuse me, his section of Berlin that has been, we talked about that a little bit with Yalta and Potsdam. He closes off entirely, and the Allies are like, well, these people, they have about a month's worth of stuff, supplies they need, essential things to live, coal, water, food, etc., before they really start running short. So the Allies, in this sense here, the U.S. and Britain primarily have this massive airlift. You've got planes landing and taking off from Western Berlin every 3 minutes or so. They airlift supplies constantly to East Germany, couple tons of supplies going to East Germany, and eventually Stalin realizes, like, this is not working. They're still getting supplies. His goal with enacting the blockade is to get total control over Berlin, by forcing the other powers, the U.S. and Britain in particular, to say, hey, these people are suffering. We've got to give it up. We've got to allow him to control, everything as he wants, especially Berlin, the entire city, not just his section, but our section too. But with Operation Vittles being a success, aka the Berlin Airlift, Stalin recognizes this is not working. It's not having the goal I wanted, so he lifts the blockade. Shortly thereafter, you have alliances being formed, kind of, you could argue, similar to World War I, which might have similar impacts if things were to go badly here. But you got NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, bunch of groups there, you can see them, or countries listed there, you can see them listed. Basically, they're just going to get together and agree to counter the Soviet Union. If they get attacked by someone like the Soviet Union or someone that they're allied with, they will defend each other. Same thing for the Warsaw Pact, except for it's the Soviet Union and their allies against the U.S. and their allies and against NATO. You're going to see primarily Eastern Bloc countries plus the Soviet Union in the Warsaw Pact. NATO's a little bit more spread out, primarily, though, Western Europe and then some North American countries in general. Switzerland, Spain, Austria, and Yugoslavia are all non-aligned for the reasons you guys can see popping up on the screen here. Switzerland's been always neutral. They just want to promote peace and stability there. It's good for them. Theoretically good for everyone else if they can pull that off. Spain was anti-communist in general, plus they've been weakened from their own civil war, so they're trying to stay out of the war. Austria was split up into 4 sections, kind of like Germany was after the Potsdam Conference. So the only way they could be independent was to sign a neutrality treaty, which they do, so therefore they're out of the conflict. Yugoslavia was communist, but because they didn't sign the Warsaw Pact, they're considered left out and not really aligned. Although if you had to pick an alliance, they probably would be more with the Soviet Union. Bring us to the Chinese Civil War here. You'll notice in the years there's a gap that's kind of related to World War II a little bit. Japanese aggression in particular. Nationalists versus communists. U.S. is going to support Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists. They are much more democratic, capitalist-oriented, whereas you have Mao Zedong over there. He's going to be the guy leading the communists. Ultimately, the communists are going to end up winning, and China is going to be a, quote, loss, going to go red. They're going to go communist because Mao promises food and land to the peasants, and those are things that people want, the basic needs. So with that happening, you have the People's Republic of China is going to be communist. Nationalists are going to flee to Taiwan and be the Republic of China, which we still support them. These governments are still around today. This is a big loss for us, which, there's a lot of people in China, meaning now there's a lot of new communists. North Korea is where we're going to be going next here. Which is kind of directly related to China here. But we're thinking, hey, we can't lose Korea as well. So 38th parallel is kind of the dividing line between North and South Korea. Soviets support a communist government in the North, and the Americans, we support a democratic capitalist government in the South. there's going to be conflict when the North Koreans invade South Korea. Truman says, hey, United Nations, we can't really allow this. Can we get some troops to handle this? So the UN and American soldiers try and push the North Koreans out of the South. It's kind of a back and forth with MacArthur, the general stalemate. By about 1950, Chinese troops get involved on behalf of the North, and it ends up being a stalemate right back where we originally started at the 38th parallel. So really, nothing gained or lost other than a lot of lives, time, and resources. And 1953 rolls around, there's a ceasefire, and fighting has ended. Technically not officially ended because there is no treaty, though, although for all intents and purposes, it is over. This is that containment policy, kind of getting at work here a little bit, involving the U.S. here. Kind of the forgotten war. You guys should have read this up on Canvas, so I'm not going to discuss it a little bit here. So hop on Canvas if you guys need to look over these things. Truman and MacArthur. Truman wants a limited war. He doesn't want to go all out. He doesn't want to risk, retaliation by the Soviets, especially with the possibility of them having the atomic weapons and using them against us. MacArthur's wanting to go all out, wipe out communism, wipe out China. And because they have a difference of opinion here, MacArthur criticizes Truman, which gets him fired. MacArthur does still return home, though, and he's still a hero because he was involved in World War II. Everyone knew him from then, so they still like him. Arms race is going to happen here with mutually assured destruction. When the Soviets get the bomb in 1945, there's a power shift. Now there's much more equal footing between the U.S. and the Soviets. Hydrogen bomb gets tested as well, which is significantly more powerful than everything that was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You got the concept of mutually assured destruction going on as well, which basically just means you've got two guys pointing guns at each other with strings attached to each trigger, and if one pulls it, it's going to pull the other trigger here. Kind of highlighted by this cartoon in a sense. If Kennedy on the right there for the U.S. president, if he were to destroy Khrushchev and the Soviets on the left, he's also going to be hurt. Same thing with Khrushchev. If he destroys Kennedy, he's going to be hurt too. So it's kind of like we talked about in class briefly, threaten to throw your friend in the pool, and they say, well, I'm taking you with me. Same concept here, mutually assured destruction. If you go down, they go down too. And this is going to kind of prevent war to some degree because nobody really wants to unleash nuclear war and have themselves in turn be destroyed. We talked about duck and cover here a little bit. This is kind of PSA stuff by the government in which they're trying to make people feel more secure, more calm, give people a sense that they can do something about this. Although in reality, if a nuclear weapon was dropped, there's probably not going to be very much you can do short of, unless you're underground, deep underground in a shelter and that sort of thing. 1952 rolls around, and we've got Eisenhower winning. So that's good news for the Republicans, former war hero. Eisenhower's new look in foreign policy. He wants to cut the military budget, reduce the military in size budget-wise and rely on nuclear weapons. Issues with that is your manpower is cut. That can affect war. Plus, now you are relying on nuclear weapons, which means they're going to be at the forefront, which they do have a greater power for destruction. Dulles, his Secretary of State, has a domino theory that if one country falls, they're all going to fall. So therefore, we're probably going to have to step in. He's also a fan of the policy of brinkmanship, massive retaliation. Kind of that, taking it to the very edge, hey, we're about to drop this Soviet Union, so back off kind of thing. And this is going to be practiced under the Eisenhower administration, which you can argue makes the Cold War a little bit warmer, a little bit more tense. Stalin is going to die, and as a result, Nikita Khrushchev, who you can see there gesturing and giving a speech, he who comes in and is the leader of the Soviet Union wants to de-Stalinize things if possible. He wants to try and peaceably coexist with the U.S., maybe not agree on everything, but at least kind of go along to get along. That way the Cold War simmers down a little bit. Eastern Bloc, you see these uprisings in Poland and Hungary. The major difference here, why Poland is allowed and Hungary is not, is because the Hungarians want to overthrow the communist government entirely, whereas the Polish people are still communist. So as a result, Hungary's revolt is crushed, and the Polish revolt not so much, because this would be a threat to Soviet power if Hungary is allowed to leave. U.S. doesn't do much because what are you going to do if you step in? A, we're not directly affected, but B, if you step in too, there's going to be some potentially nasty repercussions with the concept of mutually assured destruction. All right, so we got the Suez crisis here now. Egypt is trying to take control over the Suez Canal here. Jumping ahead real quick, it's right here where the mouse is moving. You can see it on the screen. This is big for trading in oil in particular. Egypt takes control of it. Great Britain and France, they send troops back in. U.S., Soviet Union, and the UN forces kind of get involved, and they force Great Britain, France, and Israel to back off. Egypt controls the Suez Canal, and this is, again, a big deal because it affects Western countries with their trade, but also primarily their resources and supplies of oil.